Perfect. So basically, what I've done in this space is I want to find before, let me walk you through this process. You want to find an article that is one, something that you're interested in, but then also kind of ties to your maybe your work or your industry, whatever that might be. So for you all, as you know, this is DIM. We're all about getting people to dream careers, but then also making sure that they get to some of them big cities, right? So it's really important that we understand, for me at least, especially here in Chicago, that downtowns are becoming more desolate, right? So they said a stat in here that really caught my eye. I was like, oh, this is interesting. But it has they're basically saying like remote work error, which is important to you all because that a lot of the work that you all might be going into. You might have a hybrid situation, you might have a remote situation. So things like Slack and everything that we're doing in Zoom calls might be your new norm for the rest of your career, right? But the stat that really caught my eye was it is empty downtowns with office occupancies hovering between a low of 50 to 60% in large cities, right? Like New York, San Francisco, Austin, and Dallas. So you're seeing a lot of these corporations pulling out of their office spaces. And now downtowns are emptied a little bit more, right? It actually is one of the reasons why I moved into one of my apartment, right? They lowered the rent because this was a area close to where the working district is downtown, right? So you're seeing this all over the place. And what's even more important, and as someone who's a small business owner and partner, is now because you're having a movement of people from out of downtown, that also affects small businesses who are used to getting traffic, right? So you're used to that traffic on a day-to-day basis, and now you don't have that traffic. So now you have to shut down your small business, or you have to kind of figure out maybe moving to a new space, whatever that might be. So think about that from a bigger standpoint. I know this is something that maybe you all think of, maybe it's not, maybe it's something you will start to see as you figure out where you're working. But a lot of the times when people are working in a specific space, they are working close to their job, especially when they're a transplant, right? You've never been to a city. This is an area where, hey, it's only a 10-minute commute to my job, or it's a 5-minute commute to my job, right? So that's why this article is really important, because now they're going to have to upgrade these downtown spaces, right? Office buildings, parking lots, right? All these things. And especially, I'm speaking from a major city, right? Third biggest city in the US, Chicago, where downtowns are centered around office spaces, right? So you have trains, you have small businesses like I talked about, and these other businesses are suffering. And I normally, when I have some free time, I like to walk around and see what's happening with these small businesses, because there's literally pockets of Chicago where it's just office space, and there's just like I remember there used to be like a CVS. That CVS closed, right? Because now nobody really works downtown. So now it's pretty isolated. So after like 5 o'clock, when you would leave that working area, all the businesses shut down because nobody's there during that time, and the weekends are isolated. So now you're seeing all these businesses needing to move and transition. So it'll be very interesting in these next few years to see how they reinvest into these downtown spaces, right? They're talking about taking these parking lots, turning them into parks, and creating more housing for these downtown areas, but trying to figure out how do we get people to move to these areas specifically. So just something that I thought was interesting. Not going to belabor you on the details of all of it. I will put links to the newsletter and the article in here so you all can check it out if you want to. But going back to the structure of this, right? So I gave you all what the article was about, why I thought it was specifically interesting, and now it's time for a few follow-up questions. Now, the follow-up questions that we always want to ask with these are not necessarily just about your specific industry, right? Because to some of you all, this is like, this doesn't apply to me. I'm not looking for a job downtown, whatever, right? But how can you create questions that relate to it? And the connection point to this is, how do you create relatable conversations in the workspace, right? I want you all to practice trying this out. And because of this, you'll be leading some of these groups in discussion. So let's say we have a smaller group like today. It might be you lead that group and you jump into a breakout room and lead that discussion with someone, right? And that way you're answering questions or you're giving your thoughts and things of that nature. So for me, my 2 to 3 questions on this would be specifically thinking about your job and where you want to go, right? What type of what type of uh what type of work atmosphere, right, is in your dream job, right? Have you thought about that? Have you looked at it, right? Is it going to be mainly remote, or is it going to be a little bit of hybrid, or maybe it is a mixture of remote and hybrid, or maybe it's just fully remote, right? So thinking about that, what does that look like for you? Then thinking about that, how does that affect your way of living, right? So for some of you, you might say, hey, I want to move to a big city. Others of you are like, hey, I just kind of want to stay where I am and that's just going to work out for me, right? And then the other thing you should think about is specifically, what does your downtown look like? Now, that's just like a little fun thing that I'm going to throw in there, right? Like, what does your downtown space look like and what do you enjoy about your downtown space? So something just random in there. I'm trying to create conversation pieces that last, right? That connect to you all, right? Rather than just the article, because I think the article is just something that you find interesting, and us talking about it when I was presenting it are the things that I find fascinating about it. But it's the follow-up questions that I want you all to start to think of and answer, and then we'll come back and have a dialogue about it. Now, today I've gone a little over my time, so we're not really going to have too much dialogue about it, but the dialogue will consist in your groups. Make sense to everybody?
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. So your article can be really about what you're interested in, right? It can relate to your career, it can semi-relate to your career. Like this doesn't necessarily relate to like my career, but it relates to like the work that we do at DIM University. So I thought that would be interesting for you all to understand how remote work is good in some spaces, but then also bad, right? And the last thing that I forgot to mention is like, especially for a place like Chicago, because, and I don't know if you know how this all works, but basically in a city, taxes are built um off of like businesses and high rises, all of that stuff, right? And when you have like a strong producing area, which is your downtown area, that produces a lot of the tax money. And a lot of that tax money goes to government services and public transportation. So now, if you don't, so if you have like, think about it, right? How this will affect everybody eventually, you have these downtown areas that were producing so much financial income, and all of that is being taxed to the government. Now it affects public transit. So how do we reinvest into public transit? Are we putting money aside? So these are things, if you live in a major city, it affects you, but also if you live in a different smaller city, it still will affect you in some shape or form, because I'm sure remote work is affecting the stuff that's going on in your day to day. Make sense? Cool. So we're gonna give you a little bit of extra time.